The studio lights felt warmer than usual, the kind of heat that settled on your shoulders and refused to move. Reba McEntire sat upright at the table, hands folded neatly in her lap, her trademark smile resting comfortably on her face. She'd been on television sets her entire life, bright lights, fast conversations, moments that vanished the second the cameras cut away. This was familiar ground, or at least, it usually was. The audience applauded as her name was introduced, and she nodded graciously, that calm confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. At first, the conversation was easy. Stories about touring spilled out naturally, long drives through empty highways, diners that stayed open past midnight just because a bus pulled in, the strange intimacy of performing for thousands of strangers who somehow felt like family. Reba laughed, her Oklahoma drawl slipping in and out as she relaxed into the rhythm of the show. The host smiled, chimed in, teased her about cowgirl boots and rhinestones. It all felt light, friendly, safe. Then the topic shifted. Someone made an offhand joke about the South. It was quick, tossed out with a laugh, the kind of remark that might have passed unnoticed on any other day. The audience chuckled. Reba's smile stayed in place, but something in her eyes sharpened, like a door quietly closing. She listened as the joke turned into commentary, as humor slowly gave way to generalizations, about education, about politics, about what kind of people came from those places. Words like backward and stuck floated casually across the table, softened by laughter but no less heavy. Reba didn't interrupt. She never had been the type to jump into a fight. Instead, she watched, absorbing every word, every tone shift, every glance exchanged between the hosts. She'd learned long ago that listening could tell you more than arguing ever would. The comments kept coming, wrapped in irony and sarcasm, each one landing a little closer to home. Accents were mocked, traditions were dismissed as outdated. An entire region was reduced to a caricature. The audience laughed again, louder this time, and Reba felt the weight of it settle in her chest. She thought about her parents, about lessons learned at a kitchen table where respect mattered more than volume. She thought about the people she grew up with, farmers, teachers, church volunteers, mechanics, people who worked hard, showed up for one another, and never once thought of themselves as lesser. She thought about how often those stories were ignored because they didn't fit a convenient narrative. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, almost tender. "You know," she said, tilting her head slightly, "where I come from, we're taught to listen first." The table quieted just a bit. She talked about small towns where everyone knew your name, where neighbors brought casseroles without being asked, where kindness wasn't performative, it was expected. She spoke of resilience, of communities that survived droughts, floods, and hard times without losing their sense of humor or heart. One of the hosts interrupted, smiling tightly, reframing her words, pushing the conversation back toward humor. Another added a comment that sounded like agreement but carried the same underlying dismissal. Reba tried again, explaining that pride in where you come from doesn't mean refusing progress, that tradition and growth can exist side by side. The interruptions came faster now, overlapping, the tone sharpening. She felt it then, the shift in the room. The easy warmth was gone, replaced by tension that crackled under the studio lights. Her hands tightened together. She glanced at the audience, at faces that looked uncertain now, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. The applause sign flickered, unused. A comment landed that crossed the line. It wasn't shouted or cruel, just casually condescending, as if it were an obvious truth everyone should accept. Reba inhaled slowly. Years of experience kept her voice calm, but there was steel beneath it now. "I've spent my whole life representing where I'm from," she said. "Not because it's perfect, but because it deserves respect." The table fell quiet. No one rushed to fill the space. She continued, choosing each word carefully. "You don't have to agree with us. You don't even have to understand us. But laughing at people instead of listening to them, that's not conversation. That's dismissal." One host offered a quick apology, another tried to soften the moment with humor, but the damage was done. Reba felt it clearly, like a boundary being crossed. She looked down briefly, gathering herself, then looked back up. Her expression wasn't angry, it was resolved. "I came here to talk about music," she said softly. "About stories that bring people together. And I'll always stand up for that. But I won't sit at a table where I'm from is treated like a joke." The silence that followed was heavy, stretching longer than live television ever allowed. Reba pushed her chair back gently and stood. The movement seemed to ripple through the room. A few gasps echoed from the audience. Cameras shifted, unsure whether to follow or stay wide. For a moment, no one spoke. Reba nodded politely, a small, dignified gesture that felt like a goodbye. Then she turned and walked off the set, her boots clicking softly against the floor, leaving behind stunned expressions, unfinished sentences, and a studio that suddenly felt far colder than before. Backstage, the quiet hit her all at once. The laughter, the applause, the constant hum of voices vanished behind the heavy door, replaced by the low buzz of fluorescent lights and the distant echo of footsteps. Reba stopped for a moment, one hand resting against the wall, and let herself breathe. Her chest rose and fell slowly, deliberately, as if she were coming down from a long, sustained note. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't angry. She just felt clear. A producer hurried toward her, headset slightly askew, eyes wide with the kind of panic that only live television could produce. "Reba, wait, please," they said, words tumbling over each other. "This is being misunderstood. We can fix it. We can go back out, clarify." Reba turned, her expression calm but firm. "I understand live TV better than most," she replied gently. "And sometimes the most honest thing you can do on live TV is walk away." There was no bitterness in her voice, no raised tone. Just certainty. Another staffer approached, offering water, offering apologies that sounded rehearsed and frantic all at once. Reba accepted the bottle, nodded politely, and thanked them. She wasn't interested in blame. She wasn't interested in winning. What mattered had already been said, both at the table and by her decision to leave it. As she made her way down the hallway, her boots echoed softly, a familiar sound that grounded her. She thought about the first stages she'd ever stepped onto, the ones held together by wooden planks and hope. She thought about how often she'd been told to smile through discomfort, to let comments slide because, that's just how it is. Somewhere along the way, she'd learned that grace didn't mean silence. Outside, the evening air felt cool against her skin. The city lights glimmered, distant and indifferent, and for the first time since she'd arrived that morning, her shoulders relaxed. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Once, twice, then again. She didn't look. Not yet. Inside the studio, the show scrambled to regain its footing. Commercials rolled early. Hosts offered uneasy smiles, vague explanations, phrases like strong feelings and passionate discussion. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, sensing they'd just witnessed something unscripted, something real. Clips were already being cut, shared, slowed down, analyzed frame by frame. By the time Reba reached her car, social media was ablaze. Support poured in from fans who felt seen, from people who recognized themselves in her words even if they'd never set foot in the South. Others criticized her, calling the walk-off dramatic, unnecessary, overblown. Reba knew this rhythm well. She'd lived long enough in the public eye to understand that you couldn't control the noise, only whether you let it define you. She sat quietly for a few minutes before turning the key, the hum of the engine filling the space. Memories surfaced uninvited. Her mother's voice reminding her to stand tall, her father's quiet strength, the countless conversations she'd had with people who felt invisible in rooms that claimed to be inclusive. She thought about how many times she'd sung about heartbreak and healing, about pride and pain, about home. When she finally glanced at her phone, there were messages waiting. Fellow artists, old friends, people she hadn't spoken to in years. Most were simple. "Proud of you. Thank you for saying something." That took courage. She read them slowly, one by one, letting the words settle. Later that night, back at her hotel, she sat by the window with her guitar resting across her lap. The city stretched out below her, restless and bright. She didn't play at first. She just held the instrument, fingers tracing familiar grooves in the wood. Music had always been her language when words fell short. Eventually, she strummed a few quiet chords. No melody yet, just sound, just grounding. She thought about the people watching the clip over and over, forming opinions, arguing in comment sections, projecting their own experiences onto a moment they'd only partially seen. She knew some would never understand why she'd walked off. And that was okay. Near midnight, she posted a short message. No anger, no accusations, just a reminder that respect isn't regional, that listening matters, that dignity doesn't require agreement. She didn't mention names. She didn't relive the moment. She let it stand on its own. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Stories poured in, people sharing moments when they'd felt mocked for where they came from, when they'd stayed silent and wished they hadn't. Others admitted they'd never thought about how jokes could cut so deeply. The conversation shifted, slowly but noticeably, from outrage to reflection. The next morning, headlines framed the moment in every possible way. Some called it a clash, others called it a stand. Reba didn't read them. She packed her bag, slipped on her boots, and prepared for rehearsal. There was a show that night, a crowd waiting, songs that still needed to be sung. On stage, hours later, the applause was thunderous. Louder than usual, longer. Reba stepped up to the microphone, eyes scanning the sea of faces before her. For a brief moment, emotion flickered across her features, quick and honest. "Thank you," she said simply. The crowd understood there was more behind those two words. As the music began, she sang with the same warmth she always had, but there was something else woven into it now, a quiet strength, a reaffirmation of who she was and where she came from. Each note carried the weight of lived experience, of choices made not for applause, but for truth. Somewhere far away, a television studio moved on to the next episode, the next guest, the next carefully timed debate. But the moment lingered, not because of the controversy, but because of what it revealed. That, sometimes, the most powerful statement isn't shouted into a microphone. Sometimes, it's walking away with your head held high.